All right, everybody, welcome back to another vBrownbag. Tonight, we're going to be talking monitoring. We're continuing our series with the VCP6 with Mr. Dan Barr. Say hello to the audience.
Hello, audience.
And we have a special guest host with us. Would you introduce yourself, Mr. Guest Host?
Mr. Guest Host here. Hey guys, this is Kyle Murley from vBrownbag. I do the Latin America. Happen to be here in the Bay Area, and Ahmad had me over to their office, so happy to be on. Thanks, Dan, for presenting.
So just some quick show notes. You can follow us on Twitter using the vBrownbag hashtag, or you can jump in on the conversation in the GoToMeeting window as well. Don't forget we have other shows going on globally, so check those out. And you can also download them via iTunes or directly from professionalvmware.com. Tonight's guest is Dan Barr. You can find him on Twitter at vdanbar. I'm your host, Ahmad Yunus, on Twitter at Ahmad_Yunus. And you can find Kyle at Kyle Murley on Twitter as well. One thing I do want to point out is if you're going to VMworld this year, don't forget to register for the Tech Talks. Definitely we appreciate the support there. With that, we're going to hand it over to Mr. Dan.
All right, did that come up?
It did.
All right, perfect. All right, so hey everyone, as Ahmad said, I'm Dan Barr, long-time listener, first-time presenter, so hopefully this isn't a flaming train wreck. We're going to talk tonight about VCP6 Foundations exam, Section 7, actually the final section of this exam, which is monitoring of vSphere implementation. There we go. All right, so there's three main objectives in this section. The first is to monitor ESXi, vCenter server, and your virtual machines. The second one is create and administer vCenter alarms. And objective 3 is install, configure, and manage your vCenter operations manager. And yes, the blueprint does refer to it using the old name, which is why I kind of took it as referring to the older version of Foundations, which is what I'll be showing off here because it's all I'm licensed for. So we can dive right in. Some of the resources called out by the blueprint. These are all from the official vSphere documentation, all for the version 6. So we have the troubleshooting guide. There's actually some amount of overlap between the monitoring section and the troubleshooting section that we had last week. So I'll try and skip over or go quickly through some of the overlap stuff. Second is the vSphere monitoring and performance guide. We have the vCenter server and host management guide, the resource management guide, and then 4 different guides related to vCOps. So to get right into section 7.1 here, this section has most of the meat of the blueprint. It's definitely the longest section. So I hope to try and get through the slides pretty quickly so we can dive into the lab. So the first objective is around tasks and events. So tasks and events are records of actions that are occurring in a vSphere environment, whether they're user-generated by doing something in the environment, or through the API, or whether they're system-generated in response to something occurring in the environment. They can be viewed on the monitor tabs of vCenter objects at pretty much every level, and every type of object will have a monitor tab showing the tasks and events related to that object and its children. Tasks can be informational, warning, or error severity level. And by default, vCenter server only retains task and event records for 30 days. So that's probably something in a production environment you'll want to look to change and increase. And that is configurable in the vCenter settings. You can even turn it off and just retain tasks and events indefinitely. But of course, your vCenter database will grow because of that. Oh, and I forgot to mention before, obviously, if anyone has any questions, jump right in at any point. So performance charts are another big piece of monitoring a vSphere environment. If you don't know what's normal in your environment, it's kind of hard to troubleshoot when you think something's going wrong. And so if you're not doing careful monitoring of your environment, whether it's through the event log data or performance charts, you can run yourself into trouble pretty easily. So performance charts have two main types. There are the overview charts and the advanced charts. Overview charts are kind of summary charts where VMware has kind of picked out the most important, or what they think are the most important metrics to show you, and will show you multiple thumbnail charts all in kind of one page inside the web client. Advanced charts are where you can dive deeper into all of the available objects and counters that you can monitor. There's definitely a lot more information available than in the overview charts. You can configure the chart type. You can get a line graph, which is the default, or a stacked graph. You can save customized chart settings to go back to later. And you can also export the advanced charts to image or CSV. For both types, you have a selection of what time ranges you want to be looking at. So you can go anywhere from real time up through a day, a week, month, a year, or you can just specify a custom time range and set your own. And we'll take a look at that in the lab and play around with those a bit. Next topic the blueprint talks about is logging. So again, in the Monitor tab, you're going to find on most objects, you're going to find the log browser for the vCenter logs and for your ESXi hosts. From here, you can export the system logs, which we actually saw Mike do last week in the troubleshooting section. You can also do that from the action menu. If you right-click the vCenter or a host inside your environment, you can do an export of the system logs from there. Here I just noted down the different log file locations, whether you're on Windows, on the vCenter server appliance, or for the log files on an ESXi host. So that's where you'll find, underneath these paths, you'll find a whole bunch of directories and, all the log files stored within for the various operations. And here's actually a list I pulled from the VMware knowledge base. There's a knowledge base article on vCenter log file locations. So you can see here for a Windows-based vCenter, the vCenter server appliance, and then what each log is. And I won't go through every one of these, but I threw it in here for reference. It's kind of your main service log for vCenter is going to be this VPXD log. That's where most of the activity around vCenter is going to go into. Then you see you also have broken out logs for various services within your vCenter. And the same thing for the ESXi logs on your hosts. Again, most of the action is here in the VM kernel log. That logs all activities related to virtual machines and the host itself. Then there's a separate log broke out for warnings and a summary log with uptime and availability statistics about the host. Then there's logs for the host agent and the vCenter agent. So those are the agents that, the host agent manages ESXi and its VMs. The vCenter agent is what communicates with your vCenter between the host and the vCenter. There's a shell log which records commands typed at the ESXi shell. It's a good security auditing log there. The authentication log. This is authentication related to the local host system, so this will not be your vCenter SSO logs. This is just login activity to the host itself, which should in most cases probably just be the vCenter logging in. There's a general syslog, and then also a log file per VM, and that is stored in the VMFS path or the NFS data store path where your virtual machine configuration files reside.
Dan, a question in there is, are the shell and agent logs the same? That's from Graham.
It does actually appear they are, yeah. Yeah, this again came from the right from the. Oh man, my mouse scroll wheel is really sensitive tonight. Yeah, so they are actually stored in the same log file, just with a distinction on the log record, so you can tell which is which.
Thanks.
Moving on from logs, and again, we'll hit all this, or most of this at least, again in the lab, but I'm going to at least get through all the knowledge tasks on the objective. Next item up is scheduled tasks. Not 100% sure why this is in the monitoring section, but I guess we can monitor the state of our scheduled tasks, but it's also got items in there on creating your own scheduled tasks. So you can do that to run tasks once or at a recurring interval. You create them from the scheduled tasks page in the Manage tab of vSphere object in the web client, or by if you bring up the Actions menu for an object, either by right-clicking it or hitting the Actions menu. If you hold down the Control key, you'll actually get a little clock icon next to the tasks that you can schedule, and if you click right on that clock, it'll actually take you into the scheduling interface, which is kind of a nice shortcut. So some example things you can do with tasks: you can change the power state of a VM, do a shutdown guest, restart guest. You can do a hard power off restart, power on. So if you have VMs that aren't used at certain times of day and you want to save some resources, you can schedule those kinds of things. You can enable or disable dynamic power management on your hosts. So if you want to enable that overnight or during the weekend and let some hosts power down, but make sure that on Monday morning things are back up and all your hosts are available again, you can do that through a scheduled task. You can change the resource settings of a resource pool or a virtual machine. Again, can be helpful for prioritizing different sets of VMs and different times of the day. You can check the compliance of a host profile against an ESXi host. If you're using host profiles, that could be a handy thing just to kind of keep them in check on a regular basis. You can take a VM snapshot on a schedule. Just don't forget about them. And you can also create a VM, clone a VM, deploy a VM from a template, or do a vMotion or storage vMotion migration of a VM as a scheduled task. That's one I've never really done myself. I could see using the scheduling a storage vMotion for off hours, but some of the other stuff I haven't really seen used. Some other topics in this objective are one of them is resource maps. These are actually only available in the legacy desktop client. I guess it's just one of those things they didn't rewrite for the web client. I don't know if it's coming or if it's just going to be one of those things that kind of disappears. I hope not, because it's actually a really useful feature. Basically gives you a visual map and representation of your topology, and I misspelled vSphere there. That's great. The maps are available at most of the inventory levels and will give you a relative view of your topology and how things are interconnected and what the relationships are between your VMs and your hosts, your data stores, your networks. There's also a vMotion resources view, which will kind of show you some green lines between your VM and all the hosts in the cluster to indicate that, yes, your VM can actually vMotion successfully between all these hosts. There's the checking of the vCenter service status and management of the vCenter services, which can be found under the system configuration. This actually changed with vSphere 6. It's now located off the home screen under System Configuration and Services. That's where you view the state and the health of all your vCenter and Platform Services Controller services. And you can, do stop, start, restart actions. You can change their startup type from automatic to manual or vice versa. You can also, if you're running a Windows vCenter, you can obviously see those services in the Windows Services console. The ESXi host agent, like I mentioned before, that is responsible for configuration on the host and for actions related to the VMs on that host. So that host agent you can control the status of from the DCUI, the console user interface, or from the ESXi shell with the commands shown there. You can also do the same for, so I showed The host D, etc init.d/hostd will control the host agent. VPXA will control the vCenter agent. So if you're having issues with your communication to vCenter, you might need to check on the status of the VPXA agent. And you can issue that start, stop, restart, or status commands. Another topic in here is vCenter timeouts. So these are timeouts for vCenter operations. And there's a separate setting in there for what they call normal operations and long operations. There's not really a definition of what's what they consider a normal operation versus a long operation. That might be buried in the documentation somewhere, but so you can set normal operations are set in seconds, long operations you set in terms of minutes. I've never personally seen a need to change those, but it may come up. And if you do change them, you do have to restart your vCenter server. And I'll show you in the lab where we can find those. And finally, to monitor your vCenter connections and sessions. So from there, you can see all the users and their system service connections to your vCenter, and you can terminate those sessions. So if you have a misbehaving application, like in our case, our backup application tends not to close its sessions, and so after a week, we wind up with 7 sessions. So occasionally, you need to go in there and clear them out. And that's it for the material for Objective 7.1. So we can go into the demo here.
Hey Dan, we got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Okay, did the shell log file change between 5.5 and 6? On 5.5, it's var log shell.log.
So one of two things happened there, and I should have verified this myself. One of two things happened there. Either the doc is wrong, where I got that table, and it hasn't changed, or yes, maybe it has changed. If we have time, we can maybe pull up one of my hosts, and we can actually take a look.
One other possibility that I'm trying to dig up a KB on it is that the shell.log is only the shell stuff, and then everything else rolls up into, I think it was the VPXA. So they may both be correct, right? So the shell.log stuff gets logged in the VPXA as well as separately to just shell.log, but I want to go confirm that.
That could be. And then I know they also made some improvements in terms of auditability of several of the logs. So if you're performing an action through vCenter as user Dan, in the past it always used to show up in the actual host logs as being executed by the vCenter user. Now it will actually also include the actual vCenter user who executed all these actions.
Yes, huge shout out
for auditability. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if that was just Mike Foley driving that, but shout out on that if he was involved at all. That was great.
All right, so we can, let's see, what do I need to do here? Oops. All right, so here we have the web client. Yes, I know I have expiring licenses, thank you. So the default layout for the web client, we've got our recent tasks at the bottom pane here. So this, by default, is going to show tasks from the last that were completed within the last 10 minutes. And also, by default, it's only going to show my tasks. So that was something that was kind of done for performance. You'll notice here you can switch to all users tasks, but it's going to tell you that it's actually disabled by default, and that you can enable it by editing the web client.properties file on the vSphere web client. That's basically one of the tweaks they made to try and improve the performance of the web client, is to not be constantly polling for everybody's tasks. So and I'm actually gonna, for now, just hide that to get some space back. Over here on the right, we have the alarms panel, which we'll actually get into in the next section. And we also have the work in progress panel, which isn't really relevant to this section. So I'll just hide those two to get some more real estate here. So the first thing we're going to look at, we saw the recent tasks pane here. One of the other things we can do is click more tasks, which will take us off the home screen to the task console. And the task console is all tasks, not just mine. This is always going to be all tasks. It's just not in real time here down in your tasks pane. So here we can see the status of these tasks. Obviously here I had a shutdown failure because I didn't have VMware tools running in this guest. Here we have all the details we need about this task. So what the name of the task was, and this dot label, how this is being displayed. I did do some searching on that. Apparently that's a kind of a quirk that happens in some people's environments. Then I wasn't able to find a workaround. That should be a more descriptive task name. But anyway, with the target it was performed on, the status, any details about the task, who initiated the task, how long it was queued for before it began, when it started, when it completed, and what vCenter server it was run on. And I only have one, so it's always the same. Down here we get a little more detail in that we see related events. So here's where tasks and events kind of come together. So doing this task generated this event. And again, I'm not getting the right labeling on here because of some bug. It actually shows up right in the thick client, but so we can also browse events. So again, from the home screen navigator here, we have the global event console. So this is going to show all events for all vCenters that this web client knows about and is connected to. So again, we get some similar information. We get a description of the event. So in this case, it's a logon. It's an informational type. Here's the informational error, and warning is the other type of event, the other severity of event. The date and time it occurred. This is a good reason why NTP is very, very important in a vSphere environment, and having consistent time so that you can correlate tasks, events, and also your system logs on the vCenter on your hosts. If this was related to a task, it would show me that task and the target it was operated on. My recent events don't really. Yeah. Oh, there's one. So there's an alert actually from a VM. So it's saying this alarm event occurred on this VM here, and this of course is a link, and I can go right to that VM and check out what's going on. And also, if the event was related to an action or logon, the user who initiated that action is listed. We can also see tasks and events from objects in our inventory. So if I, let's say, go to a host here, go to the Monitor tab, I have a Tasks section, which shows me all the tasks. It's the same view of tasks as the global console, but it's only the tasks related to this host and all of its child objects. So any of the VMs currently running on this host or that were running on this host at the time the task happened are going to be shown here. Same for the events. It's going to be relative to this host and all of its children. And the same views available basically at a VM level. We have tasks and events that are just related to this VM. So we can get more and more granular with what's going on in the environment. Same goes for the, we have tasks at the vCenter level, which are going to show all the events and tasks under that vCenter, and data stores, same kind of thing. So let's get into performance charts. We'll start out here at a host level. Again, performance charts are one of those things that you'll find them at a lot of the levels. Most objects have performance charts. It's just the metrics you'll be able to see will differ between them. So if I'm still in the Monitor tab here on my host, if I go to the Performance tab, it's going to default to bringing up the overview charts. And so here's where you can see I can't really customize this. It's showing me metrics that VMware has picked out as the most common performance metrics for, in this case, a host. In the case of a host, I have a different view. I can choose the home view, which is showing me things like CPU and memory, disk activity for this host. I can also change the view to virtual machines, and it's going to actually show me thumbnails and summaries of virtual machine activity. So in this case, it's a stacked graph. There's only 2 VMs right now running on this host, but it's a stacked graph showing the, the CPU network disk activity. I can also come down here and get even cuter little thumbnails for each of the VMs on this host for CPU, memory, and some disk and network activity. You can see I've got a real busy lab here with no activity. We can also change the time ranges. So if I go back to the host home view here, here's where I can select any of these time ranges. If I go real time, these are actually going to refresh every 20 seconds for me and only go back an hour. But they're the same metrics as before, just on a different time scale. Or we can set a custom range where I can pick a start date, start time, end date, and end time. By default, the overviews are going to show 1-day summary. Now, if we flip over to the advanced charts, so here again we have some default views for CPU, data store, disk, memory, network power, a whole bunch of different default views that have already been predefined as being relevant to hosts, because that's where we are in the inventory. You see I have a legend here with multiple, in this case it's a line chart showing multiple metrics. So we have the overall host CPU usage in %. We also have a breakdown of each of the 2 CPU cores on this host. So those would be the physical cores. They're broken out separately in %. And then we also have the overall host usage in megahertz for the entire host. But if that wasn't enough detail for me, we can click on Chart Options here and gain access to all of the metrics and counters for our target object here, which in this case is this host. So if I wanted to, instead of usage in megahertz and all this, if I wanted to see, let's see. Let's go with, I want to see memory, and I want, for the last day, a line graph of this host. I want to see the swap rates. So I'm going to click none here just to clear out the selected counters, and I want to see the swap in and out rates. So swap out is actually the rate at which memory is being swapped from RAM to disk, and then swap in is the reverse. It's disk being swapped back into RAM. And I'm actually going to save these because this is something I want to see frequently. So I'm going to save these options as my own chart called swap rates. And we just hit OK. So now I've got my very own special chart here in the views list. And you can see, luckily, I've had 0 swapping activity. That's what I want to see. There's some other customization we can do here. There's 3 options for graphs. We can do a line graph, which is the default, where each counter is represented on its own line. And there's a stacked graph where they're stacked on top of each other, and then the top of the stack is the total. And there's also a stacked graph per VM. So depending on the metric, you can break out. Let's see. In this case, if I want to see ballooning activity on this VM, or on all the VMs on this host, so we'll call it VM. I'll see all the VMs. I can save that again, or no, I don't. So I want to select all the, in this case, just the VMs. I'm going to do a stack graph per VM and show the ballooning. Again, this is probably going to be a pretty boring graph because it's 0. If we had ballooning, better option would be CPU. So if we do a percentage usage stacked per VM, now we see, in this case, this VM is the kind of bluish. It's on the bottom. This one's stacked on top, and the top of this line at any point is the total for all the VMs in this list. So those are just some of the options we can do on advanced charts. You can see a lot of lot of power in them. I mentioned we can also export them. So this little export icon here, I can save these out to JPEG if I want. And it just asks me where to save that. Or we can do the same thing to a CSV file. So that can be helpful for including in documentation. Passing along to a VM owner who might be complaining about performance, and you can go show them that their CPU is pegged at 100% for the last day, and they might want to go look at their application. And so we have advanced charts and overview charts at basically every level of the vSphere environment. So if we go up to our data center level and our performance, you can see we have a different set of overview charts. We only have a CPU and memory. This is going to be for all of the clusters within this data center. We can also then break that down into the smaller thumbnails for each cluster. Now I only have one cluster, so here's the breakdown per cluster. You can also get a storage view from the data center level. And again, all the same time ranges. In the case of storage, I can't get a real time, but I can get the same for the rest. And in this case, it's going to show me my utilization. And I can, again, break out down here to the smaller charts per data store. So again, real good for real quick kind of high-level overview, see if you see something standing out. But then the real dive is in the advanced charts. And we mentioned a different set of metrics available because now we're at a data center level and not a host level. So the data center, our only metric is virtual machine operations. And then here are the counters available for this. So it's things like, VC, and most of these are roll-ups. So then, we can see the number of storage vMotions that have been performed, number of VM clones or creates. So these are mainly VM operations that we get at the data center level. Same thing at the cluster level. We have overview performance charts related to a cluster. So in this case, we get the CPU and memory consumed on this cluster. We can also get a breakout for the virtual resource pools and virtual machines in this cluster. And again, get a little more detail here. So in this case, I actually have a vApp, which is technically a resource pool. So I'm going to see the summary for that, and also a summary for my one standalone guest in this cluster. Or actually, the first one.
We actually have a question.
Sure.
Would advanced charts be able to provide a replacement of information obtained by esxtop?
So the real-time view of the advanced charts is going to be a lot of the same data that you can get in esxtop, yes. Most of the counters are going to be a lot of the same counters you can get from esxtop. What the advanced charts can't necessarily, so out of esxtop you can do kind of a long-running monitor dumping out to a file from esxtop. That's probably a little harder to do in a real-time fashion with the advanced charts, but you can definitely get a lot of the same information.
Thanks.
Yep. All right, so then I was just showing here, so in this cluster, since I have more VMs than it really wants to show me on one page, there's actually a case where it might go to multiple pages with these little detail charts at the bottom, and you have to move over. And again, another view we have here at the cluster level in the overview charts is a view of the hosts. So here's the CPU and memory, disk and network consumption on the hosts, and again, I see which hosts are part of this cluster, and I can get little overview thumbnails of them. So there's a lot of different views into different parts of the environment depending on where you're looking. Again, the advanced charts. Now we're at a cluster level, so there's another set of chart metrics. We have the CPU usage across the cluster services, some effective resources available to the cluster, memory stats, and again, some of the same virtual memory or virtual machine operations that we get at the data center level. Hosts stats we already looked at. We can go resource pools and vApps actually have the same sets of metrics available to them because basically a vApp is a fancy resource pool. So at resource pools we get some similar, some of the same information, CPU, memory related to just that resource pool or vApp. We can also then see the virtual machines that make up this resource pool or vApp. And again, the advanced charts. At this level, we just get CPU and memory stats, some very basic stats at the resource pool level. The VM level is probably where, between the VM level and the host level, are probably where I spend most of my time in the performance charts. Again, we have summaries of some of the common metrics related to this VM. In this case, we actually get a little different view. Instead of, because there are no child objects of this VM, it's actually going to give us a little thumbnail view of the host it's running on. So it's actually going back up the tree a little bit. So I can get a quick glance at, well, this VM's running a little slow, but is it because the host it's on is pegged? So we can get some relative data there. And again, we have multiple views, so we can see a storage view related to this VM. There is no time slicing of this, of the utilization, but we can see how much space is taken up by our virtual disks, our other VM files, what data stores we're on. But then you can also see a line chart of how the space utilization has changed over time, which can be really useful if you're thin provisioning. And again, on VMs, we have all these metrics available in our advanced charts. So you can see now that we're at a VM level, we have quite a few back. Some similar things to what we had on a host, but of course it's only going to be related to this VM. So again, we can check, a good thing to check on your VMs is CPU ready, because that can indicate an overloaded host, where the VM has cycles ready to be scheduled, but the host is unable to schedule them. And an excessive amount of that can lead to hung VMs and lead to all kinds of problems. And then the final graphs I wanted to show were actually the data store graphs. So if I pick out an NFS data store that I've got here, I have performance charts for it. Now in this case, for data stores, we only have summary graphs, and they're mainly space utilization. So if you want to see things like IOPS, disk throughput, you've got to do it from other places like esxtop, or at a host or VM level, or even a cluster level. The performance graphs, the overview graphs here for a data store just show utilization. All right, so that I think is it for all I had for performance charts. Any other questions outstanding?
No, we have no questions. You did an awesome job.
Okay. So I was going to hit a few of the other topics in this objective. So one of them is configuring some of the vCenter settings, including email, snmp, and some of the other logging settings. So that we actually do from our vCenter node here in the inventory. And on the Manage tab, under the General Settings section, we can view, again, expand these out and see some of these settings. If we hit the Edit button, first thing we'll want to configure is our mail settings. So obviously if we have, if we're going to configure alarms and we want to send out emails based on those alarms, we're going to need to specify an SMTP mail server here and a from address that the emails will be addressed as. We can also configure SNMP receivers. Out of the box is a default one configured for localhost. It's basically the vCenter looping events back on itself for monitoring. You can configure up to 4 receiver URLs or host names. You can configure the port, enable and disable each one of them individually, and also specify the community string for that. This is just snmp v1, v2. Unfortunately, still doesn't look like any snmp v3, which would be a lot more secure. And we also have our statistics settings. These control the intervals and retentions and also the detail levels of our advanced performance charts and then other statistics. So each of these interval durations, these are the defaults here. I haven't changed these. Each of these durations you can do monitoring of those counters, performance counters, down to every minute. By default, it's 5 minutes, although if you're in the real-time graphs view, those aren't actually saved to the vCenter database, and those refresh every 20 seconds. But all of these settings here are configuring the statistics that are actually saved to the vCenter database. And then what happens is when this save for, in this case, 1 day period is reached, those stats are rolled up into the next level. So my every 5-minute polls they basically pick the first one of every 30-minute interval. So as time goes on, the granularity of the statistics goes down, which is something we'll actually talk about in the vCOps section a little bit. The statistics levels go from level 1 to level 4. Level 1 is the default and is basically the least chatty, I guess. VMware's documentation says only use level 4 if you're debugging something, because that will basically turn on all counters available in the system. There's also a nice little database size calculator here. So if we wanted to say, well, okay, I've got 10 hosts and 200 VMs, there's an estimated size of how much space I'll need for the statistics collection in my vCenter database. And if I change these, like say down to 1 minute, you'll see that went up from 2 gigs to 3.8 gigs. So you can kind of balance the space you have available for your database with how much granularity you want in your statistics. And again, if you're troubleshooting something, it might be good to come in here and especially if you need to kind of monitor something closely over a period of time, it might be good to come in here and tweak some of these for temporarily. We also have our vCenter logging settings here. This is the log level for vCenter server itself, not for hosts, just for the vCenter. And so we have options from none all the way up to trivia, which is basically absolutely everything that it can log. And again, that's one of those things you only want to do if you're working with support to troubleshoot something. The default is info. The database settings is where we specify our task and event retention. We can also specify the max number of database connections that the vCenter will make. The default here is 50. Again, that's one of those ones I just haven't really ever had to adjust. Someone in larger environments may have had to. But here we can turn on, and again, these are the default settings. Task cleanup and event cleanup are both enabled with a retention of 30 days. You can bump that retention up, or you can simply disable it to keep all events or all tasks. But again, keep in mind your database growth if you do that. But I do think 30 is probably a little on the short side in general, especially on tasks. If you're needing to audit who's doing what in your environment, I think longer retention on tasks is really called for. Another thing mentioned in the blueprint is timeout settings. So there's a few of those. There's the normal and long operations timeout settings I mentioned. And then there's also timeouts on the user directory settings. So this is going to be, in this case, the directory is single sign-on. So this is basically going to be how long a user directory, a query can go before it times out to single sign-on. That's it in the vCenter settings as far as related to monitoring. Next setting, or the next thing mentioned is creating log bundles. We actually saw that last week in the troubleshooting section, but as a quick refresher, if we go to our monitor tab here in our log browser, We can actually view and filter on the logs from here, or from the actions menu, we can export. So in most cases, if you're working with VMware support, you're going to want to export a VM support bundle. We can do that at the vCenter level. We can also do it by right-clicking. We can also get to them by the system logs area. So if you want to do a complete log bundle, including the hosts managed by this vCenter, you'd actually do it from system logs or by right-clicking the vCenter and doing an export system logs. And here's where you can choose, all right, which hosts do I want to include in this log bundle, and do I want to include the vCenter and web client logs or not. So if I just wanted one host and the vCenter logs, I can then export those and send them along to support. But you can also browse the logs from here. There's not really a filtering interface, whereas with the log browser, you can kind of filter on those. All right, next up is scheduled tasks, unless there's any questions.
No questions.
All right, guess not. So I'll, okay. So I was mentioning you can, from the actions menu, if I right-click this VM here to get its actions menu, and wait for it to finish loading here, if I now hold down the control key on my keyboard, you'll see that two of these actions have a little clock by them now that wasn't there before. So these are the tasks that I can actually schedule. If I open some of these submenus, you'll see that all the power actions have schedulability. Taking a snapshot, I can schedule. So if I start to do that, let's schedule a shutdown, a clean guest shutdown of this VM. So if I was still holding control, I click on the clock, it's going to bring me into the scheduling interface for this. It's going to show me what my target is, what my operation is. It's good to make sure before you power off the wrong thing. And under my scheduling options, I can give the task a name, a description, and click change here to configure the schedule. So I can run it now, which I may as well have just right-clicked it and done it normally. I can run this after startup, which I believe in this case is the startup of the vCenter. And or in most cases, you're going to be scheduling it to run later. So you can pick a date, pick a time, or you can set up a recurring schedule to say, shut down this VM every day at 9 p.m., and then we're going to power it back on every day. We can schedule a separate task to power it back on every day at, say, 6 a.m. before everyone comes in. So if we set up a scheduled task, we'll say run in 2 minutes here. Okay. So we can see in our recent tasks pane now, we now have my scheduled task, and there we see it's completed. If I go to this VM, to the Manage tab and Scheduled Tasks, we'll see my task here. It's scheduled once. There's no last run or last run result because it hasn't run yet, and my next run is 9:20 p.m. And so in a minute, that should kick off and go. We can also schedule a few things at a host level, mainly a new virtual machine. At a cluster level, we can actually schedule adding a host. I'm really not sure the use case on that one. Again, we can schedule creating a new virtual machine. And I don't think you can do it from the right-click menu, but somewhere you can actually also schedule turning on and off DPM. I think you would do that from, if you're not sure what can be scheduled and don't really feel like poking around the menu, holding your control key, if you go to the scheduled tasks page on an object and drop this down, you can see all the options available. I actually don't see DPM. That's in the docs, but I forget where you actually configure that particular task. And there are no scheduled tasks at host level. Oh, that's not right. Well, anyway. So that's scheduled tasks, and if we actually do a refresh here, we should see by now, yep, my Linux guest 1 VM is powered off. We can see my last run was at 9:20, and it was a success, and there is no next run because it was only scheduled once. This task will remain here. The scheduled task will remain here. I can edit it to run it again, so I don't have to recreate these every time, and it'll also show me the last 5 runs in the history. All right, resource maps are next up. So for this, I've got to actually switch over to the old client. And we go saying resource maps are available at a bunch of different levels under the Maps tab. So here at the vCenter level, I'm going to see basically all of my hosts, VMs, networks, and data stores. And I can toggle on various relationships that I want to see in the graph here. So if I don't, if I just want to see what hosts and VMs are connected to my data stores, boom, now I see my NFS1 data store is connected to both my hosts, ESXO1 and 2, and all these VMs are running off of that data store. It's also a quick way to say, hey, I've got no hosts or no VMs running off this data store. Do I really need it anymore? As long as you're looking at this at the right level, you'll see everything related to it. So we can change any of these relationships. Again, do the same thing with networks. I only have one network. It's a pretty simple lab. Everything's connected to it. Now we can zoom these out. In a large environment, these are going to get pretty big and pretty hairy. So you may need to zoom out a ways to be able to see the whole thing. We can also switch between some predefined map relationships. So this is host resources. So it's basically going to show a host-centric view of what my hosts are connected to. We can get a VM-centric view of what hosts and data stores and networks my VMs are connected to, or we can get a data store-centric view. Some default settings there, or do a custom map and select your own. Similarly, you get similar kind of view at the data center level. So if you had multiple data centers, this would break under your vCenter. This would break things down a little further. Same thing for the cluster level. Again, kind of the same default views, depending on what you're looking for. And unfortunately, I wish you could export these. I mean, you can screenshot them pretty easily, but it would be nice to have an export option for these. Host level, we also have maps. Again, just a different view of the world from the host level. If my client wants to respond, here we go. And down at the VM level, the map we're actually going to get is that vMotion map I mentioned. So this is the only map available at a VM level, and it's showing, you see the green behind each of the hosts. That indicates that this VM is able to vMotion to either of these hosts because both hosts are connected to the network I'm connected to, and they're also connected to the data store that this VM is on. If there was a host in this cluster that was either not connected, didn't have a port group on this network, or was not connected to this data store for any reason, it would actually show up with a red background. So it's a real quick way to see, if you might have vMotion issues.
Hey Dan, Kyle, comment there. I think when you're on the map view there, if you go up to File in the client, and
oh, you're right. Look at that. Export maps.
And then you get, I think it's a PNG, a JPEG, BIMP.
Yeah, mostly image formats. Yeah. But well, I used to always just bring up the snipping tool and
that works too.
Nice. Thanks.
Sure.
All right. So, any questions on maps or any of the other stuff?
Graham had a question. Maybe it's feedback from people. Are they useful, and do people actually use them? They're cool to look at. But anybody got really cool, good use cases for them?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't really use them day to day, but I've definitely used them in documentation.
There you go.
But yeah, day to day, I'm more in the the performance charts and tests and events, that sort of thing. All right, so I'm actually going a little long here. We're getting coming up to the end of the hour. I'll breeze through the rest of this objective, and then the next two objectives don't actually take too long. So one other quick thing, so I want to show the vCenter service status, how to see that. So again, if we go back to the home screen here, in previous version, in 5.5, this was actually located under the vCenter object, monitor, and health. Or no, I'm sorry, health is vCOps. It was service health. But now there you just get a message that, oh, hey, this has been moved to the system configuration UI. So that's actually located. You can click there to go to it, or show you where it's located here on the home menu. Under administration, we have system configuration. Here's where we have our nodes. In this case, I have a converged PSC and vCenter, so I only have one node. If I had a separate platform services controller, or if I had multiple vCenters all linked, they would all show up here in nodes. And then services is all my services. So we can get a quick little health overview here. We're seeing all my services appear to be good, which is a good thing. If we click on services, we see a list of them over here on the left, or we can go to the objects tab here and see the nodes and all of our services. You'll notice there are many more services, even on a Windows vCenter now than there used to be with 5.5. I think there were 5 or 6 services with 5.5, and now basically each one of these has a representation as a Windows service on a Windows vCenter, and similar service on the Linux appliance. So from here we can restart or stop these services. If a service is not running, we can edit its startup type to be automatic, manual, or disabled. And that means basically some of the services will actually have settings related to it. So one example of that is the, if I can expand, is the ESXi dump collector. So you notice it's off by default, but it also has settings available where I can specify the UDP port that the core dump server is going to be listening on, and the maximum size of the repository. So those can both be changed, and we can also then configure that service to start automatically if we want to configure the remote dump collector service, which if you're running diskless ESXi hosts with no local persistent storage, like if you're running off of auto-configure or not auto-configure, auto-deploy. If you're running off auto-deploy, a stateless auto-deploy, or if you're running off of SD cards where you don't have a persistent scratch volume, the dump collector is definitely something you're going to want to set up along with your syslog settings. Interestingly, the blueprint doesn't get into syslog settings and the syslog collector, but that is another default service that comes with the vCenter and is actually installed and on by default now, which it wasn't in 5.5. So we have here the, sort this by name. I know it's here. And again, I'm getting some of these localization label issues. So, but the syslog service is another good idea if you're running without persistent scratch. And then the very last thing in this section I'll show you for now, since we're running a little long, is viewing vCenter sessions. So if I come onto the monitor tab at my vCenter level here, the manage tab of my vCenter level here, and go to sessions. These are all the logon sessions that are currently connected to my vCenter. So some of these may be from services, some of them may be from other solutions like vCOps that integrate with vCenter and maintain a connection, but then the rest, others will be like here. I have 2 sessions. This session is identified as this session, which is helpful. So if I were to, actually I can't terminate my own session, but I could, if I went to, here's my web client session, I could actually terminate that session from here. All right, so let's dive back into the objectives. So the next objective is create and administer alarms. This is a fairly short objective. Alarms are notifications that are triggered in response to an event or based on the conditions of an object. So like I said, they can be event-based or condition and state-based. Those are the two fundamental types of alarms. There are 3 severity levels, just like with events. There are normal, warning, and alert alarms. You can perform different actions based on the event that occurs and the severity. And the standard actions that are available on all alarms are to send an email, to send an snmp trap, or to run a command, which will actually allow you to run a command or a script on, and that'll actually execute on the vCenter server. So if you're running a Windows-based vCenter, you could actually execute, run PowerShell and invoke a PowerShell script, or run any available Windows command. If you're running on the server appliance, you're going to be restricted to Linux commands and Linux scripts that you load onto the VCSA. Then depending on what you're monitoring, whether it's a host or a VM, et cetera, there may be other actions available, like power actions on a host and a VM. So if you've got a VM spiking CPU, and that's the example we'll do, you can actually have the action, the alarm, go ahead and reboot it for you. Like if you know you have an application that misbehaves and a reboot fixes it, you can actually have the alarm fix it for you and also let you know about it. There are in a default install of vCenter or vCenter 6.0, because alarms are a vCenter only concept. They do not exist if you're just running a standalone host. But there are 105 default alarms, but none of them have any email or script actions configured by default. So you've got to go in and do that yourself or create your own. And we'll go right back into the demo here. And yes, configure alarms or So the default alarms are all defined at the vCenter level, but you can actually create custom alarms at just about any level of the inventory. But we'll go ahead and look at the default alarms here. So the alarm definitions, any currently triggered alarms are going to be on the Issues tab here. And under triggered alarms and the all issues views, and also on your default alarms pane over here on the side. So you can see I've actually got 2. I've got high memory usage on 2 of my hosts. I can acknowledge this alarm, which will just kind of gray it out, put a little check mark next to it, but it'll stay here until that condition clears. I can go ahead and reset that to green, which will actually clear it out, but within, I think, 5 minutes, which is, I think, what I have that alarm configured for, it's going to come back because that condition still exists. Some alarms do that, some don't. It just depends on how they're polled. Some actually won't come back until they clear and then come back again. Others will come back right away. But to actually manage our alarms, we got to go to the Manage tab and Alarm Definitions. And here's all 105 of the default alarms. So you can see some of them are VM-centric. Some of them are cluster-centric. We have HA operations going on. If an HA failover occurs or is in progress, we can get an alarm on that. In this case, it's a trigger based on any of these events. This default virtual machine, where is it? So the example that's an example of an event-based alarm. If these events occur in the environment, this alarm will trigger. Another example would be in the host CPU usage. This is actually a condition alarm. So this is saying if this condition exists, there's no event triggered here, but if the host CPU usage is above 75% for 5 minutes, we're going to go to a warning alarm. If it's 90% for 5 minutes, we're going to go to an error alarm. So let's create a custom alarm, because that's definitely something on the blueprint here. We're going to actually, the first thing we're going to do is, let's say we have this host CPU, this default alarm here that comes out of the box. Something you might want to do with a lot of these alarms is actually add an action. So in this case, we want to And here you can see some of the things we can do on a host alarm. We can have the host enter maintenance mode if this happens. Probably not a great idea if our CPU is high, because then that's just going to make the rest of our cluster works. But there may be certain events that occur on a host that indicate a hardware issue, and you just want to evacuate that host. You can actually have the host enter maintenance mode. In this case, we just want to send a simple notification email. The configuration field for an email alert in this case is going to be the email address you want to send it to. In the case of an alarm notification or an alarm action for sending a trap, there is no configuration that you can actually do here. It's going to use those snmp receivers that we configured earlier. Or if you do the run a command, your configuration here is the command you're going to run. And then we can also control, so if we're going to send an email, when, under what conditions, and how often this occurs. So let's say I only want to get the email when we go to red, but I want to get it repeated every, let's say, 15 minutes. So now when that condition remains red, I'm going to get an email every 15 minutes. I also want an email when we go back to green, because I want to know when the condition is cleared. I'm not going to go investigate it in the middle of the night if it's already cleared itself up. So that's configuring a pretty simple action on a default alarm. We can also add our own new alarm definitions. We can do this. So alarms are scoped. We can enable and disable alarms at any level. So if we edit one of these default alarms, we can actually just disable it. We can also, say if this is a VM, so we have a VM alarm, but we know we're doing some work in this VM and it's going to trigger a whole bunch of alarms and we don't want to hear about it. You can right-click the VM, get to the Actions menu, under the Alarms submenu, and disable alarm actions on this object until you come back and re-enable. So that's a key thing to remember, to come back and re-enable it when you're done. You can do the same thing for host alarms, cluster alarms, whatever the scope is. If there's a resource pool where I want a particular, or a VM folder where I want a particular alarm, but I don't want it on all the VMs in the environment, I can just create an alarm definition right here at this level. And it will only apply to this object and its children. So let's say I wanted to create, we can just see some of the options available to custom alarms. So give it a name. We're going to pick what we're going to monitor with this alarm. So we can monitor pretty much any object in the vSphere environment. So let's go back to that example of we have a VM where we know it's got a misbehaving app that occasionally just goes crazy and pegs the CPU at 100%, and nothing fixes it until you reboot. So we're going to monitor a virtual machine for a condition, because our condition is going to be our CPU usage. Our other choice here is for a specific event that occurs. So we'll go next. We can trigger if any or all of the following conditions. We can define as many conditions here as we need and do basically an and or an or. By default, it's an or, so it's if any one of these triggers, we're going to actually trigger the alarm. We see all the things we can trigger on for a VM. So you can see a lot of potentially useful stuff here to trigger on, and in this case, we want CPU usage is above or below. We want above. We're going to say, we know this thing's getting bad if it's at 75% for 15 minutes. And if it's at 90% for 20 minutes, we want to go red. Now for our actions, we're going to do two things. Actually, three things. So first, we're going to try rebooting the guest. Just see, hopefully it'll respond to a clean reboot command. And this will be, we want to do this if we go to yellow. So if we're at that yellow mark, we want to just try a reboot. If things are really bad, and we're going from yellow to red, we're actually going to reset the VM hard. And I also want an email when this happens. So we're going to send a notification email to billg@microsoft.com because it's a Windows app. And we're going to do this when any of these things happen. So we're going to do it on get an email. If we go to yellow, we're going to get another email. If we go to red, if we go straight from green to red, we'll just get one email. And also when we go back to green, oops, I want an email when we go back to green. So, the reboot has occurred, we're back to normal, we get a nice email. But we also get emails to know that it happened. And now we've got our vBrownbag alarm. You can see where it's defined. If we go down to a VM at a lower level, in our alarm definitions, we see our alarm here, but we can't actually edit it from here because it's defined at a higher level. So we've got to go back to the vCenter level to actually edit that alarm. And that's pretty much alarms. Any questions?
No questions.
All right, great. So our last segment here is installing, configuring, and managing vCenter Operations Manager. And again, the blueprint specifically refers to it as vCenter Operations Manager, not the new vRealize operations. So I took that as basing it on vCOps Foundation. So vCOps Foundation, or vCOps, as I know VMware didn't really want you to call it, but I call it anyway. vCOps Foundation, version 5.8.5, it was the last version, the latest version of that. That is included with all vSphere editions. It's delivered as an OVA vApp, which actually contains two SUSE Linux VMs. There is a UI VM, which displays all the user interface components of vCOps, and there's an analytics VM, which does the actual collection and analysis of the data. Now, note that with the new vRealize Operations 6.0, that architecture has changed quite a bit. There are three sizing choices when you import the OVA, small, medium, and large, based on the maximum number of VMs you need to monitor. And there you can see there's pretty hefty requirements, especially as you get up really large in the environment. vCOps collects performance data from all of the objects in the vSphere environment, or from a vCenter that you have configured it to monitor, is actually what it pulls in. And unlike the vCenter charts, performance charts, where we were showing that loss of granularity over time, where your polling period gets further and further apart, there is no loss of fidelity over time with vCOps statistics. It keeps everything for as long as you tell it to. And like I mentioned, the licensed editions is now vRealize Operations version 6. There is no foundation version of vROps, vROps. Whether one's coming or not, I don't know. I don't work for VMware, so I don't have an inside track on that. But there are three editions: Standard, Advanced, and Enterprise. You can get the Standard edition if you purchase your licenses, your vSphere licenses, as the if you get the vSphere with Operations bundle. That will have your vSphere Standard, Enterprise, or Enterprise Plus with vROps Standard only. You can bump that to Advanced by going up to the vROI bundle, which also gets you log insight. Or you can buy vRealize Operations standalone on a per VM pack basis. I think it's 25 packs of VMs, and you can get that at any of the three editions. Or you also get various levels of vRealize Ops with the vCloud suite bundles. So a bunch of different ways to get it. Foundations is included, but you're limited to the older vCOps, not vRealize.
Hey, Dan.
So the deployment, you can actually kick off the deployment. Yeah.
I think with the new vRealize operations, I think if you don't put in a license, I think it defaults to Foundation.
Does it? Okay, I haven't actually tried that with the new one, but I mean, I have read that there is actually technically no Foundation version. If you go to the download page for vSphere 6, the link for vRealize Operations Foundation is to version 5.8.5.
Right. I think I think this is something I read earlier where it was talking about if you don't license it or don't have the appropriate license, it would default to a foundation-like.
Okay, I mean that would definitely be nice if that's the case.
I'll see if I can get more clarification.
Yeah, it does seem to be a bit of a gray area right now, and hopefully they do clarify that pretty soon. So like I was saying, we can start the deployment of vCOps. Oh man, my mouse has decided to lose its mind. All right, sorry about that. So we can actually start the deployment of the vCOps web app right from the vCenter web client, which, and again, actually, this is going to kick off an installation of vCOps 585, not vRealize Ops 6, even in the vSphere 6 web client. Or you can actually just download the OVA yourself from my VMware and import it like any other OVA. If we do click that link off of the web client home screen, we'll get to this screen with a task to deploy vCOps, and then it'll start by asking you for your My VMware credentials to verify that you're authorized to go get it. It will download it and then just take you through the normal OVF and OVA appliance deployment process. Once you get the appliance or the vApp deployed, there's a first run wizard where you have to provide some data. Including the address for the vCenter that is hosting you. So the first run wizard you access by going to the DNS name, the FQDN, or the IP address of your UI VM, not your analytics VM. So if you go to HTTPS, your UI VM /admin, the default login to kick off the wizard is admin with a password of admin. The first thing you need to provide is the address, either an IP or FQDN, and an administrative credential for the vCenter that is actually hosting this instance of vCOps. It's not necessarily a vCenter you're going to monitor, but it's the one hosting this vCOps, so it can do some of its own configuration as part of the deployment. Then it's going to prompt you to change the default admin account, which is the application level vCOps admin account, and also it's going to have you set the password for the root account on the, and this will be set on both appliances. And then it'll have you enter the details of the first vCenter that you actually want to monitor. Doesn't have to be, like I said, doesn't have to be the same one that's actually hosting the vApp, but it can be. So you just have to enter a display name that just shows up in the vCOps configuration. You enter the address, either an FQDN or IP, a username and password of an account with the privileges to register the vCOps extension and plugins to the vCenter. Is usually an admin level account. And then optionally, you can specify a reduced privileges, and the vCOps documentation has exactly what privileges you need to grant for a collection user. And this is what the analytics VM will actually use to pull data out of your vCenter. And so that can be, best practice would be to have a least privilege account doing that and not use an admin level account all the time. So some terminology related to vCOps and also relates to vRealize Ops. So attributes are the types of data collected by vCOps. Metrics, a metric is one instance of an attribute for a specific inventory object. So for example, CPU utilization on a VM XYZ would be the metric instance for the CPU attribute on a VM. Key performance indicators, or KPIs, are objects that are deemed as critical to an object's performance. They factor more heavily in the monitoring that vCOps does. And dynamic thresholds, these are defined for every metric. And unlike static thresholds or hard thresholds where you define what's good and what's bad and what's the max and what's the min, these are dynamically based on current and historical values, and this can actually, over time, operations manager will learn the normal baseline for each metric, which can differ based on time cycles. So if you have a weekly or a monthly closeout process that hits your databases and your app servers really hard, vCOps will, operations manager will actually learn that and stop alerting you because that's actually normal. That's supposed to happen. Whereas with a static threshold, you'd get that every week or every month whenever that occurred. Badges are how Operations Manager basically displays color coding and scores that it derives from the metrics. And there are major badges and minor badges. Those are all listed here along with the icon that represents them. So we have 3 major badges of health, risk, and efficiency. And then the minor badges for health are, so the health score is made up of a roll-up of workload, anomalies, and faults. Risk is derived from time remaining. The default buffer here is 30 days. It's basically the percent of that 30 days that you have remaining in your capacity. So if it determines based on your consumption rate that you're going to run out of storage for VMs within 30 days, it's going to start to impact the risk score. Capacity remaining is based on the number of VMs that you have remaining with your capacity that you can still deploy. Stress will actually identify undersized VMs or hosts. So VMs or hosts that are under stress because they need more resources. And compliance is actually based on data coming in from vCenter Configuration Manager. If you don't have vCenter Configuration Manager and that integration configure, you just won't get a score for compliance, and that won't impact your risk score. And then under efficiency, we have reclaimable waste, which will actually be showing you oversized VMs and resources that can be reclaimed to go back in the pool for others to use. And density, which is your consolidation ratios. Now you can see here vCOps Foundation, you only get workload and faults. And I missed a bunch of stars here, but you get the workload and faults minor badges for the health major badge, and that's it. So it's a really reduced set of information that you get with the Foundation version, unfortunately. The badge scores range from 0 to 100. For things like time remaining, capacity, efficiency, and density, 100 is good. For the rest, things like workload, anomalies, faults, 100 is actually bad. But Operations Manager knows how to weight those and what's good and bad on each one. And the badges will change color based on their score. So you'll go from green to yellow to orange to red. Gray is offline, or it's not able to collect data for that particular metric. And so we can have a quick demo here. Again, I just have vCOps Foundation my environment here. So we can start in the web client. If we go all the way out to the home screen, here's that link I showed you where we can actually deploy vCOps from here. Since I've already done that, I have 2 other options to open Operations Manager, which will pop it open in a new browser tab for me, or I can do some configuration from here, just like which vCOps I want to do, and actually take me out to the admin interface on my vCOps UI VM, which is where you do things like configure email settings, configure the VMs you're going to administer. Let's see if I remember the password I set on this guy, and I don't think that's it. Nope. That is. So we can see the registration status, what license SKU we're operating under. Metrics profile, balanced versus full, basically controls how granular the metrics are. The balanced profile is default. I believe full profile will result in more data, more size for the vApp, and probably a heavier load against the infrastructure that you're monitoring. Here's where we register our vCenters. So the first one that I registered during the setup wizard is listed here. vCOps can monitor multiple vCenters, so we can add all of those here. By adding the information for each vCenter. We can register to vCenter Configuration Manager to get that compliance data. And also there's an integration with Log Insight where basically alerts, there's kind of a 2-way integration where alerts can be linked between events in login site and alerts on vCOps. We can set our SMTP email and snmp settings. We have some SSL settings for vCOps itself. You see I'm still running on the self-signed cert, but you can install your own certificate there. We have some status information. This is mostly, this might be some information that the support would need, or you can check your registration details, if all your services for vCOps are running. Perform updates from here. Just upload an update package and it'll update the vApp, the vCOps vApp, and also change your admin and root passwords from here. So that's the admin interface. Not a whole lot to it. Where things get interesting is when we actually start looking at health data. So now that vCOps is registered to the vCenter, we actually get a new tab everywhere. We get under the monitor tab, we get the health view. And this is actually pulling summary data from Operations Manager. So there's our workload badge for this. In this case, I'm looking at the cluster. So my workload badge is 37. That gets removed from my 100 health score, and so my health is actually 63 on this cluster. With a licensed version, these become much, much more dynamic, and it figures out that, the other thing you don't get with Foundation is that dynamic thresholding. So it doesn't figure out what's normal for you. So in this case, I just get a straight, 100 minus 37 is 63, and that's my health. And then there's the trend of that health over time. If I want more details, this little pop-out button will actually take me out to my my full vCOps UI. So it does integrate with SSO, or through talking to the vCenter, because I'm an admin account, there are permissions we can put into vCenter roles to allow access to vCOps. Because I'm an admin, I have all those. And now I'm in the full view. This is the as much as we get with Foundation. So we get our kind of similar infrastructure view here like we do in vCenter, but our world view shows all our badges at all levels. So our VMs, our data stores, our hosts, clusters. If I click on one of these, let's say I click on the VM, it's going to gray out everything else and highlight only the relevant things in the path for this VM. So the host it's sitting on plus the cluster and everything there.
So hey Dan, there's a question in here. It says, are risks and efficiencies available in the new vROps Foundation Edition? And I'm not certain.
I'm not certain of that either. Like I said, there's precious little documentation on whether a foundation even exists for vROps. Like Ahmad said, he thought he saw something where it might, but it's not in. So any documentation you'll find around foundation is going to be for 5.8.
5.8, and then the other question was, is 5.8 fully compatible with vSphere 6? And I think
it is, yes, because that's actually what I'm monitoring.
That's what we're looking at. Yeah. Thanks.
So Dan, I just tweeted out a link about understanding the feature accommodation between VMware vSphere 6 and vROps 5.8 and 6.0.1, and down here it says that basically Foundation Roadmap recognizes the importance of Foundation Edition to customers. Expect future plans for vRealize Operations Foundation to accommodate vSphere 6.0.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I had seen, was like, maybe. So yeah, hopefully we'll get a Foundation Edition, an official Foundation Edition of vROps 6, so we can get everything nice that comes along with that. I don't really expect, if they do that, I don't really expect that they're going to add a whole bunch of new functionality to it that is not currently in Foundation. They really want you to buy a licensed version. So, and I've got to say, I've been running vCOps Foundation in our production environment. We don't have a licensed version. It really is pretty limited. But a nice thing is, if you've been running Foundation for a while and you throw a license onto it, all of that past data that's been collecting all that time is now instantly available with all the features. So it will figure out normal for you based on all the, you don't have to wait for it to figure that out again. It will go back to all the data it has already collected and give you the rest of the features. So that's kind of nice. So if you have the spare capacity, go ahead and throw up Foundation in the hopes that someday you can find some budget to go get a licensed version. Which is kind of where I'm at right now. So here, the overview tab here, we kind of get a high-level overview of the environment and a nice glance at all the status of the badges at each level. Here I'm showing health by default. I can change that to the workload miner badge, and it's going to show me the workload at every level, which apparently is green all the way down, which is cool. Faults. Faults are one that we do get. Workload, like I was saying, workload and faults roll up into health. So the faults badge is basically showing, and then again, in this case, low is better in terms of faults. And I can see, well, I've got some faults at my vCenter level, but as far as the whole world is considered, we're in pretty good shape. The relationships view here kind of shows somewhat similar to the maps view. Not quite as detailed. Well, yeah, that's nice. So we just kind of get a different view of the world depending on where we're at here. So if I go up to world, I'm going to see not much stuff. Like I said, Foundation, pretty limited. I don't know what happened there. What else did I want to show on this? Onto the operations tab, here's where we get a little more detail. Depending on where we're looking, we see distributions over time, top offenders in each of these categories. We see here, because I'm on Foundations, we have normal, not calculated yet. No matter how long you run Foundations, normal will never be calculated. But if I say go down to a VM here on the operations tab, I can see a breakdown of its workload for CPU, memory, disk. If I hover over here and it's, because I'm looking at the faults badge still. If I go to the, actually the workload badge, I can see some graphs here on CPU, memory, disk I/O. And again, unfortunately with Foundations, you can't do a lot of drill into these graphs. So like if I go up to a host here, I can see a little graph of CPU use. If I hover over this 11%, I see a small version of the graph. If I click, I get a larger graph with data points that I can hover over, can change the time scale, last hour, last 6 hours. But what I wanted to show is if I go to last 7 days, as you see, there's a lot of data points there. I'm not losing granularity. If I do a you can also move this around. You can do a zoom mode and select a certain slice of this. So you can see I'm going back a few days here, but if I go into this slice, I still have all these granular data points, whereas on a vCenter chart, I'd probably be, just hopping between, one every few hours. We can also then pan this. Zoom in. You can pan with the hand just to move further once we're zoomed in. So there's some nice capability there, but Foundation is definitely limited. Operations Manager also keeps track of alerts. So depending on how you handle alerts, these could wind up being pretty much duplicates of alerts you have in vCenter. These will often be triggered based on alerts that happen in vCenter. So if you're going to configure notifications, you probably do want to do it in one place or the other, but not both. You see here I can double-click to open up the details of an alert. I can choose to suspend it, which is done in terms of minutes. I can suppress it, which is done in terms of days, and it'll basically hide it from the alerts view for that amount of time and stop counting it against the faults badge. I can take ownership of this alert, which I've actually already done. You can see here the owner is me, so you can know who's working an issue. I can release ownership, or I can cancel this fault alert, and it'll just go away until it occurs again. And that's pretty much all that's in the blueprint as far as vCOps goes. It's a lot, mainly understanding the metrics and the terminology and the badges is, I think, the focus on the exam. So I know I went really long. Sorry about that. But hopefully it was helpful.
I'm just glad you didn't rush. Some people realize the time and they rush through it, but thanks for not rushing. We do have one question.
Okay.
Let's see. How often is data collected in vCOps by default?
The default, I did not write that down here. There's a difference between how often it's collected and how granular it is. And I do not have that handy. I'm sorry. I thought I had that written down here, but I do not appear to have it. If we look, if we go back to the view here and you can get an idea of the granularity. So if we look at the last hour, it appears to be every 5 minutes. So it's actually driven, because it's actually reaching into the vCenter API and pulling the statistics data, it's actually going to be driven by those statistics settings in your vCenter. So if we were, back here in our general settings, if we were set to a shorter interval, that would also be reflected in the statistics that Operations Manager gets. I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. Because in the admin UI of vCOps, there's not actually any configuration as far as polling period goes, where you define your vCenters. What? Didn't I go to admin? I guess I didn't. Yeah, so this is just connection information, not polling information. So basically it's driven by the statistics collection level of your vCenter. The difference being there's no roll-up. So as long as vCOPS is able to connect to your, with these settings, as long as vCOPS is able to connect to your vCenter every day to get these stats, it's going to have 5-minute interval. And if you go longer than a day or maybe 2, depending on how the timing works out, you might lose some granularity there, just if vCOPS is not able to talk to vCenter. But if that's the case, you probably have bigger problems.
All right.
We didn't get a chance to go looking at that shell log file, but I'll follow up on that and put it out on Twitter with the vBrownbag hashtag.
Sure. Do you have any more questions?
I haven't really been able to follow my Twitter column here. I don't know if there's any sitting out there.
Not
Doesn't
on
look
under,
like
yeah, not under the hashtag, no.
All right, great.
All right, well, awesome job.
Thanks.
Thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, and if anyone has any further questions, just feel free to reach out to vDanBarr on Twitter. I don't have a blog or anything, but you can usually reach me on Twitter.
All right, and with that, I'm going to stop the recording.